The rain was coming down so hard it felt like needles on my skin. I was deep in the woods near my pack's territory, holding this shivering little pup against my chest, trying to keep him warm. The storm was so loud it drowned out almost everything. Almost. I still heard the crunch of a boot on wet leaves right behind me. I turned. Corbin Rook stepped out from the trees. He's a rival alpha, with this deep scar running down the side of his face. His eyes were ice cold and they were locked on the pup in my arms. He pointed a stiff finger right at him. "That thing should not draw breath," he said. His voice was flat, final. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I hugged the pup tighter, feeling his tiny heartbeat against my palm. The rain had soaked right through my shirt. "No," I whispered, but the wind just stole the word. I said it again louder. "No, he stays with me." I turned my shoulder to block Corbin's view. I knew the law. I knew exactly what happened to Omegas who defied an alpha. My arms just locked tighter around the small life I was protecting. Corbin snarled, his lips pulling back from his teeth. "Alpha's law is final, Omega." Then he lunged. His hand shot out to snatch the pup from me. I spun away, putting my back between him and the baby. His fingers dug into my shoulder, sharp and bruising. The force of it made me stumble. Then I heard Maya, my human friend, shout from the edge of the clearing. She threw a heavy branch. It crashed into the brush right behind Corbin. His head snapped toward the sound for just a second. That was all I needed. I wrenched myself free and I ran. My boots slipped in the mud as I charged into the black woods. The pup whimpered against my neck. Branches whipped my face, caught my hair. Behind me, I heard Corbin's roar of fury. Then a long, chilling howl that cut straight through the storm. It was a call to the hunt. I clutched the pup and ran faster into the rain, knowing what was coming. I could handle being cold. I could handle being tired. But how many hunters were answering that howl? That was a different problem entirely. My lungs were still burning from the sprint. I was crouched against a slick granite outcrop now, the wind screaming over the stone. The rain had soaked me to the bone. A deep cold was settling in. The pup in my arms felt too still. I couldn't feel his little heartbeat through my wet shirt. My side ached where Corbin had grabbed me. Every breath sent a sharp pain through my ribs. I curled my body over the pup, trying to block the rain. I tried to warm him with hands that had gone numb. I'd always trusted the pack laws. They kept order. They kept us safe. Now those same laws said this innocent life had to be erased. Corbin called it a mercy. The thought turned my stomach. I looked down at his small face. His eyes were closed. He was so quiet. Everything I believed was breaking apart inside me. I was protecting a life my whole world said shouldn't exist. The consequences for that were absolute. I forced my shaking legs to stand. I had to find shelter. I stumbled forward, searching the dark hillside. I found a shallow overhang of rock. It wasn't much, but it broke the wind. I sat on the cold ground and pulled the pup onto my lap. I used my teeth to tear the sleeve from my shirt. My hands wouldn't work right. I wrapped the dry fabric around his small body. He whimpered once. A tiny sound, lost in the storm. That little sound gave me a thread of hope. I kept wrapping, making a small bundle to hold his heat. Then a howl echoed in the distance. It was far away, but clear. The hunt was on. Corbin's pack was coming. I had broken every rule. I had taken what an alpha claimed. I pressed myself back against the cold rock. I held my breath. Another howl answered the first. Closer this time. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was so terrified. What was I even becoming? Then I felt it. A sudden deep pull low in my stomach. It wasn't fear, it was that other thing, the bond. It felt like a warm cord tugging me east. Kalen Thorne was out there somewhere. He hadn't chosen me, something else had put us here. There's a difference. The feeling vanished as quick as it came, leaving only the cold and the distant howls. I looked up, blinking rain from my eyes. Through the trees, down in a dark hollow, I saw the shape of a roof. A dilapidated cabin. I pushed the thought of the bond aside. Wyatt had pulled me toward the sound of the howls. That would come back later. The deep, marrow cold of the hillside was still locked in my bones, but now I was standing just inside the cabin's broken door. The sharp, comforting smell of old pine logs cut through the damp air. The pup was a warm weight in my arms. I set him down on a dry patch of dusty floorboard. My hands moved on their own, checking him over. He was breathing fine, just worn out. I found an old wool blanket in a trunk. It smelled of dust and time, but it was dry. I wrapped him up until only his nose showed. A deep, hollow ache spread in my chest then. It was Kalen. The bond was a quiet pull toward the east, like a sad ghost tugging at my ribs. I pressed a hand to my sternum and frowned. I didn't want to think about him. I focused on the pup's steady breath instead. "It's just us now," I whispered. The bond's pull felt like a betrayal of that promise. I smoothed the pup's soft fur and avoided any thought of alphas. I remembered the sound of Corbin's howl. It had been answered by 3 other voices from the woods. That meant 4 hunters, including him. The math was simple, and it was bad. The pup nuzzled my hand in his sleep. I felt a warmth then that had nothing to do with any bond. It was just a small, living thing trusting me. Could that be enough? I looked at my hand, then at the pup. Faint, sad smile touched my lips. I leaned back against the wall. The cabin was silent except for the drip of water from the roof. That strange ache in my chest didn't go away. It sat there, a quiet weight. I knew it was him, out there somewhere. He wasn't coming, but he wasn't gone either. I closed my eyes. I didn't move my hand from the pup's side. What his howl had meant before the others answered. That wasn't going away. The ache in my jaw from clenching my teeth was my only company in the dark. I stood in the cabin's front room, where the chill from the warped floorboards seeped through my boots. A faint, clean scent cut through the dust, something like cold stone and pine. It was new. The door behind me blew open. A huge shape filled the frame. Kalen Thorne, the alpha from the city, stepped inside. His silver blue eyes went straight to the bundle in the corner. His shoulders were rigid. "Give me my son," he said. His voice was low, a command meant to bend my will. I moved to block the pup. His hand shot out and grabbed my forearm. Fire raced up my arm and locked my breath in my chest. My vision swam with a sudden, blinding warmth. Kalen jerked back like I had burned him. He stared at his own hand, then at me. His eyes went wide. Whatever I felt, it might just be the bond talking. "You," he said. The word was raw, stripped of all his alpha authority. He looked lost for a second, then his face hardened again, but his hand was still open at his side. "Corbin set the hunt for you, not the child." He hadn't come here for a fight. He'd come for a rescue. The realization made my own anger feel misplaced, heavy. He took a slow step closer. He wasn't trying to intimidate me now. He was just a man standing too close in a small, cold room. The space between us felt charged with a different kind of danger. I could see the faint, silvery scars on the back of his hand. "The bond pulled me toward the howls," I said, putting it together aloud. He gave one short, sharp nod. His gaze flicked to the sleeping pup, then back to my face. The consequences of my interference were written there, plain as day. He tracked his stolen son through a storm, only to find the one thing his power couldn't simply take. Real quick, if you're hooked on this high-stakes chase and you need to know if they make it out alive, hit subscribe. You're gonna want to hear how this ends. Whatever came next, what was in that sharp nod he gave me? That was the part I hadn't figured out. The echo of Kalen's command still vibrated in my jaw. I stood on the cabin's creaking porch step, the damp chill seeping through my sleeves. Then the forest around us erupted. Shapes moved between the trees. I heard the low growls of men shifting into something else. Corbin's hunters had found us. Kalen stepped out behind me. His shoulder brushed mine as he scanned the tree line. "They are not here for a conversation," he said. His voice was low and flat. I saw his hands were curled into loose fists. The silver scars across his knuckles stood out pale against his skin. That strange bond between us gave a single, hard pull toward him. It felt like a hook in my chest. I forced myself to look away from him and back at the danger. A dark-furred wolf broke from the trees and charged the porch steps. Kalen moved faster than I could track. He met the wolf mid-leap. They crashed into the railing and splintered the wood. I turned to run inside for the baby. Another hunter, still in human form, blocked the doorway. He held a long knife. I dropped my weight and kicked his knee. I heard it crack. He yelled and fell. I darted past him into the cabin's single room. The infant pup was still asleep in the corner. I grabbed the blanket and wrapped him tight against my chest. Kalen filled the doorway. Blood streaked his forearm. "They are circling to the back. We go out the window. Now." This wasn't a rescue. This was a tactical retreat. I understood that. I needed his strength to get the baby out alive. That was the only reason I followed him. He went to the small rear window and ripped the whole frame out with a sickening crunch of wood and glass. He turned to me. His eyes, that intense silver blue, went to the bundle against me. Something in his face shifted. It wasn't a king's look. It was something raw and private. Then it was gone. He helped me through the jagged opening. His hand was warm and firm on my arm. We plunged into the dense underbrush behind the cabin. The sounds of the hunt followed us. Howls cut through the trees. They weren't the mindless cries of beasts. They were calls and answers, a coordinated chase. I remembered Corbin's howl back at the warehouse. It had been a signal. It hadn't been a call to find me. It had been a command to flush me toward this cabin, toward a trap he knew his rival would run to. I put it away and got on with things. Why his face changed when he looked at the baby. That refused to stay put. The raw burn of the rope still seared my palms. Beneath the damp overhang, the first light of dawn caught in the spiderwebs strung between the mossy rocks. I sat with my back against cold stone, the infant pup asleep against my chest. Kalen Thorne stood a few feet away. He watched the tree line. The space between us was quiet but full. It felt like a held breath. He wasn't human. I had to keep reminding myself of that. The space between us was quiet, but it was full. It felt like a held breath. He wasn't human. I had to keep reminding myself of that. After a long minute, Kalen turned. He moved toward me, his steps silent on the wet ground. He knelt down. He didn't touch me. He just wanted to see the baby's face. His own face was all hard lines in the gray light. Then his eyes closed for a second too long. When they opened, that intensity was gone. It was replaced by something tired and plain. "Is he warm enough?" he asked. His voice was low. "He's fine," I said. My own voice sounded sharp. I made it softer. "He's sleeping." Kalen didn't move away. He stayed there on his knees, looking at his son. The dawn light showed the lines at the corners of his eyes. "I didn't know he existed until 2 days ago," he said. He didn't look at me. He said it to the sleeping bundle. The thought of him out there, alone, it made my hands shake. He held one hand out, palm flat. It was perfectly steady now, but I believed him. I didn't know what to say. I looked from his steady hand to his face. The bond was a warm, heavy weight behind my ribs. It pulled me toward the heat of him. I didn't move. "You found him," I said finally. It was the wrong thing, but it was all I had. He gave a short nod. The same sharp one he gave me in the cabin. I understood it now. It wasn't a command. It was a man bracing himself. He stood up suddenly, breaking the moment. He turned back to the trees, his shoulders broad against the growing light. The space he left felt colder. I stayed against the rock, holding his son, and said nothing at all. Why he had held out his steady hand for me to see, I wasn't going to like the answer. My throat stayed tight from all the words I didn't say back at the overhang. The river's roar hit me first. It was a physical tremor through the soaked ground where I knelt at its muddy bank. The water was a churning, dark wall of noise. Kalen stood beside me. He pointed to a thin ledge of rock across the violent current. "We crossed there," he said. His voice was almost lost to the storm. I hugged myself, my wet clothes clinging and cold. I shook my head. The baby shifted against my chest in his sling. This was suicide. Kalen's usual command faltered. "Please." That single word cut through the water's noise. It was not an order from an alpha. It was a request from a man out of options. He ran a hand through his rain-dark hair. The gesture was tired and human. I saw the exhaustion in the slump of his shoulders under his leather jacket. That was when I understood his face back at the cabin. He looked at his son and saw every way he could fail him. He was scared of his own power. He leaned in close so I could hear him. His scent of wet pine and sharp fear washed over me. "I can't lose you," he shouted. Our faces were only inches apart. My breath caught in my chest. I did not pull away from him. The bond between us was a quiet ache beneath my ribs. A stupid warmth in all this cold. He looked at my mouth. He swayed forward a fraction, then his whole body went rigid. He stepped back as if burned. "Follow my steps exactly," he said. His voice was rough. He turned toward the treacherous ledge, his jaw a hard line. He was putting the plan ahead of everything else. The consequence of my trust would be to step into that flood. I adjusted the sling one last time. I took the first step onto the slick rock behind him. The rest made sense. Why he stepped back from me like he was burned didn't. The river's cold had settled deep into my bones, a permanent ache my chattering teeth couldn't shake. In the cave's damp silence behind the roaring falls, I focused on the steady drip of water onto stone. Kalen Thorne slumped against the cave wall across from me. A deep cut on his arm bled into the dark fabric of his shirt. I moved to help him without thinking. He growled low in his throat. "I'm fine," he said. But he didn't pull his arm away. He watched my every move, his eyes glowing soft silver in the dark. I tore a strip from the hem of my own shirt. I reached for his arm to clean the wound. My fingers brushed the skin above the cut. He flinched. It wasn't from pain. A low rumble escaped his chest. It sounded like a purr. He stared at my hand on his arm, his whole body going very still. The way he'd looked at me just then wasn't about the threat. I didn't know what to do with that. "It's just..." "No one touches the alpha," he muttered. He seemed to say it more to himself than to me. His body was rigid under my touch, but I felt the slightest lean into my hand. The warm pull of the bond between us grew stronger in the quiet cave. I held my breath. My other hand rested on the cool stone near his knee for balance. He turned his head slowly. His nose almost touched my temple. He was breathing in my scent, a slow and deliberate draw of air. I closed my eyes against the sudden rush of feeling. Then he pulled back sharply as if burned. "Done," he said, his voice rough. He stood up quickly, putting the width of the small cave between us. The loss of his closeness felt like a physical blow. I looked down at my hands, the strip of cloth still damp from his blood, but why his hand had twitched toward mine before he pulled away? I still had no answer for that. The raw sting of his antiseptic still lingered in my fingers. Outside the cave, the pre-dawn air was shockingly clean. Tasted faintly of wet stone. Maya Patel, my human friend, stepped from the dripping pines. She held her hands up, palms empty. Her face was pale under the gray light. She said she had a way through Corbin's lines. Kalen Thorne moved before I could breathe. He stepped in front of me, his body a solid wall. A low snarl ripped from his throat. "A trick," he said. His voice was flat and final. I saw the rigid line of his back. I placed my hand against it. The muscle there was corded tight as stone. Maya looked past him, her eyes finding only me. "I know what Corbin did to you," she said. Her words were quiet, but they hit me like a punch. I stopped breathing. My hand trembled against Kalen's back. He heard the change in me. His head turned just a fraction. I saw his profile, the anger slipping into something else. It was a question. How could she know that? "I was a prisoner too," Maya whispered. Her gaze dropped to the mossy rock between us. Kalen went completely still. The forest sounds fell away. This was a truth he had never known. His own pack had hidden it. He looked down at the ground for a long moment. His shoulders sank a little under my touch. It was a small surrender. I felt the heat of his doubt through my palm. His need to protect me fought with the shame of his pack's silence. I pulled my hand back. I stepped out from behind his shadow. I faced Maya directly on the narrow ledge. The space between us was just a few feet, but it felt like a canyon. Kalen didn't pull me back. He just watched, his silence heavier than any warning. The choice was mine, and the consequence would be ours. One thing kept pulling at me: why my hands hadn't shaken when I faced her. The tightness in my chest from Kalen's warning didn't loosen, not even as the waterfall's roar faded behind us. I blinked in the low light of the safe house. The dry, dusty scent of old stone walls filled my lungs. The SUV door slammed shut behind Kalen. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet valley. I threw myself at the passenger window. My palms slapped the reinforced glass. "Don't you do this," I shouted. Kalen flinched. His eyes shut for a second too long, then he pressed the lock with a firm click. He came around and opened my door. Before I could move, his arms were under me. He lifted me out of the seat. I went stiff as a board in his hold. The scent of him, pine and cold night air, was everywhere. It made my own head spin. He carried me toward the dark mouth of the safe house entrance. He refused to put me down, even as I pushed against his chest. My boots hit the stone floor inside. I shoved away from him with all my strength. I backed into a corner of the single room. "Let me go," the words tore from my throat. A sharp, hot pain lanced through my own chest. I saw his hand fly to the same spot over his heart. His breath came out in a hard rush. He hadn't chosen me. The bond had. There was a difference. That pain was the proof. He moved to the heavy oak door. His shoulder pressed against it as he slid an iron deadbolt home. The metal screeched and then thudded into place. The sound was sickeningly final. My legs gave out. I sank to the cold floor and hugged my knees to my chest. He stood on the other side of the thick wood. I heard the rough scrape of his palm dragging down the surface. His voice came through, low and strained. "Do not try to leave." Then I heard his footsteps walking away. I was alone with the dust and the silence and my own rising fury. That question, why his hand had flown to his chest when mine hurt, sat there like something unfinished. My throat still ached from the raw, screamed curses I'd wasted on the sealed door. The chill of the evening pavement seeped through my boots. I pressed myself against the grimy brick wall of a loading dock. I'd been there for an hour. I was watching a bar called the Howler across the wet street. It was the last place Maya said she would be before she stopped answering my calls. The bar door swung open. A man with a Rook Pack tattoo on his neck stepped out. He lit a cigarette and scanned the street. I stopped breathing and pulled back into the shadow of a dumpster. The smell of spoiled food and wet cardboard filled my nose. He finally walked away. I moved quickly across the street and slipped inside the bar. The air inside was thick with smoke and old beer. A few shifters looked up from their tables. Their eyes tracked me as I walked to the bar. The bartender, a thin man with tired eyes, wiped a glass. He didn't look happy to see me. I asked him if he'd seen my friend. I described Maya. He shook his head and kept wiping the glass. I said I knew she was here. I saw the way his shoulders tightened. He was lying. I leaned closer and lowered my voice. I told him I wasn't leaving without an answer. He finally looked at me. He said a man came in 2 nights ago. He said the man had a presence that made the room go quiet. The man asked about a woman matching my description. Then he left with 2 others in a black SUV. They drove north toward the mountain roads. The bartender's hands were shaking as he put the glass down. He told me to leave and never come back. I understood the warning. I just made him break a rule. I turned and walked out. The consequences of that would find him later. Outside, the cold air hit my face. I felt a sudden, sharp pull low in my stomach. It was the bond, a faint thread of warmth pointing north. Kalen was out there. For a second, I hated that I could feel him. Then I used it. I started walking toward the edge of the district. I needed to find a vehicle. Headlights swung around the corner behind me. They slowed. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Who had been in the black SUV behind me? I'd been wrong to ignore it this long. My knuckles still ached from the white-knuckled grip I'd kept on the steering wheel for the last hour. The safe-house air was cold and still, carrying the faint, sharp scent of pine resin from the newly split logs by the hearth. Kalen stood across the room. He stared at the moon through the window. His breathing changed. It became short and ragged, like he was running. He walked to a heavy door in the floor and pulled it open. He looked back at me. His eyes were too bright. "Go to the bedroom," he said. His voice was rough. "Lock the door, do not come out." "What's down there?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just went down the stairs. I heard a clank, thick metal, a chain. I stayed where I was. I told myself I stayed because I was angry. His world had rules I didn't understand, rules I couldn't survive. The first sound was a deep groan, then came a wet, terrible snap. I flinched. I covered my ears. But my feet moved forward anyway. I stood at the top of the stairs and I looked down. Kalen was on the concrete floor. He was curled on his side. His whole body shook. Another crack echoed up the stairwell. He screamed. It wasn't a roar of anger. It was raw, pure pain. I saw his hands. They twisted into claws against the floor. I expected a monster. I saw a man breaking apart. I sat on the top step. I wrapped my arms around my knees. I didn't look away. The sounds stopped much later. Heavy, panting breaths filled the silence. I saw the wolf. It was huge. Silver-furred. It lay on its side, exhausted. The chain was still around its neck. It lifted its head and looked at me. Its eyes were the same silver blue. I found myself walking down the stairs. My heart beat hard against my ribs. I stopped a few feet away. The wolf made a low sound. It wasn't a growl. It was a soft whine. It nudged its nose toward the chain links near its jaw. I knelt. I reached out. My hand was not steady. I touched the cold metal of the collar. The wolf went very still. Its warmth radiated against my skin. I saw a raw patch there where the fur was gone. I pulled my hand back. I sat on the floor and leaned against the wall. We stayed like that for a long time. The wolf watched me. Its ears twitched at every small sound I made. I finally understood why his hand had flown to his chest when mine hurt. The bond was a shared weight. He carried his alone every full moon. I looked at the massive creature, and for the first time I didn't see a king. I didn't see a captor. I saw the consequence of his power, and it was a lonely thing. The ghost of that night of his shuddering breath was still with me when I stepped into Corbin's office. The air smelled sharp. Sterile ammonia from a freshly mopped floor cut through the warehouse's usual smell of oil and dust. My friend Maya was already at the computer. Her silver locket caught the weak light. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "The main server is locked," she said, not looking up. "But the local drive might have what we need." I watched the door, my ears strained past the hum of the machine. A cold draft slipped under the doorframe and brushed my ankles, and then I felt it. A sudden, unwelcome ache behind my ribs, a quiet signal. Kalen was somewhere close, and he was alert. My focus snapped back to Maya as the screen changed. "Got it," she whispered. The shipping ledger opened. A grid of numbers and codes. Her eyes scanned the lines, and then she went very still. A small red light began to blink on the security panel by the door. It made no sound. Maya saw it the same time I did. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Kalen, who had been watching the warehouse floor from the window, turned his head. The line of his shoulders became a rigid straight edge against the glass. He looked at me, and for a second his expression wasn't one of command. It was shared risk. "They're early," he said. His voice was low and flat. He crossed the room in 3 long steps. The air in the office grew thin and sharp. I could hear them now, the heavy tread of boots on the concrete floor below us. They were not trying to be quiet. Bright white headlights swept across the office windows. They painted the walls in a slow, glaring arc. Car doors slammed outside, one after another. My heart hammered against my sternum. Maya yanked a small flash drive from the computer port. She clutched it in her fist. Kalen grabbed my arm just above the elbow. His grip was firm. Urgent. Not meant to hurt, he pulled me toward a narrow service door in the back wall. Move, he said. Maya was right behind us, her breathing fast and shallow. I could smell the alley beyond the door, cold and greasy. We had the evidence, but Corbin's men were now between us and the only way out. We slipped through the door into the biting cold of the alley. The door clicked shut behind us. We crouched together behind a rusted dumpster. Our breaths came out in quick white puffs that vanished in the dark. I could hear voices now, inside the office we just left. They were angry, confused. Maya held the flash drive so tight her fingers were pale. She looked from the drive to me. Her warm brown eyes were wide with a terrible understanding. She had seen the ledger. She knew what it meant. The power in that small piece of plastic could break Corbin. The consequence of holding it was that we were now trapped. The alley dead-ended 20 feet ahead. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under approaching boots. The cold imprint of his fingers still encircled my wrist like a manacle. I blinked against the safe house lamp's sudden glare. Its weak bulb hummed a thin, high note against the silence. The phone in my other hand buzzed, a harsh vibration that startled me. The screen lit up with a video call request. From an unknown number, I answered before I could think. Corbin Rook filled the screen. His smile was wide and cruel. His face was framed by concrete walls, then the camera panned. My friend Maya was tied to a metal chair behind him. A strip of duct tape sealed her mouth. Her eyes were wide with terror. My free hand flew up to cover my own mouth. I pressed hard, to stop the sound trying to escape. Elara Vance, Corbin said. His voice was calm and clear. You look well for a runaway. Listen closely. You will come to the old shipping docks. You will come alone. Be there by midnight. He glanced back at Maya. If you are not, or if you bring company, my men will throw her into the harbor. The call ended. The screen went black. I stood up. The movement felt automatic. I have to go. The words tasted like dust. A sharp, hot twist pulled at the center of my chest. It was the bond, a silent scream of protest. Kalen moved faster than I could track. He stepped between me and the safe house door. His broad shoulders blocked the exit completely. A low, warning sound rumbled in his throat. You can't stop me, I said. My voice broke on the last word. I tried to step around him. He didn't move. Instead, he placed both hands on my shoulders. His grip was firm but not crushing. His eyes searched my face. The way he looked at me just then wasn't the bond. I didn't know what to do with that. He wasn't giving an order. He was asking. A single, shallow breath hitched in his chest. One thing kept pulling at me, why he had looked at me like that. The sting of his grip still burned around my wrist. My back met the solid chill of the front door, its deadbolt digging into my shoulder blade as I faced him. He filled the narrow hallway. His frame blocked any path to the outside world. I forced my breath to stay even. My own fear for Maya was a live wire under my skin. I wanted to shove past him. My body would not move from the door. He did not advance. He just stood there. His silver-blue eyes watched me. I saw the struggle in them. His hands opened and closed at his sides. Then his whole body went still. It was a different kind of stillness. It was not the control of an alpha. It was the quiet of a man bracing for a blow. He looked down at the floor between us. His voice was low when he finally spoke. I told you it was a death sentence, he said. He was not talking about Corbin's trap. You said a lot of things, I said. My own voice was tight. He shook his head once. His gaze stayed fixed on that empty space on the floor. There was an Omega, a long time ago. Her alpha forced the bond. It was a thing of power, not fate. He paused. The silence in the safe house felt heavy. I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I was young. I thought I could save her. I used my own strength to break it. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I knew what came next. The bond between us seemed to ache in the quiet. She died, he said. The words were flat and final. The severing killed her. My power, my choice, had that consequence. He finally looked up at me. His face was bare of any pride or command. There was only a raw guilt I recognized too well. Any bond I form is poisoned. It is a curse. I will not be the reason you walk to your death. I have been that reason before. All my anger left me then. It drained away like water. I saw the weight he carried. It was the same weight I felt, the consequence of trying to use power to fix something broken. I pushed myself away from the door. I took one step toward him. We were close enough now that I could see the faint, silvery scars marking his hands. He did not move away. He did not reach for me. We just stood there in the dim hallway. The thing between us was not a pull, but a shared and terrible understanding. The rest made sense. What I would do when my hand finally reached for his didn't. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down and my breath stopped. It was a picture of Maya, her face pressed against a dirty window, her eyes wide with pure terror. A message from Corbin followed. It said to come to the North Docks alone by midnight or he would send her back in pieces. My hands went cold and numb. I ran for the heavy front door without thinking. I grabbed the iron handle and pulled. A shimmering wall of pale blue light flashed across the doorway. It threw me back onto the polished wood floor. The impact knocked the air from my lungs. I scrambled up and slammed my palms against the invisible barrier. It gave a low hum and pushed back against my skin. The wards were sealed tight. Kalen appeared from a side room. He moved into the center of the hallway. His large frame blocked my path to the side windows. His voice was low and hard. "Stop." His alpha command washed over me. It felt like cold water flooding my veins. My feet locked to the floor against my will. I could not make them move. He stood very still. A muscle in his neck jumped under his skin. His eyes held a forced, glowing light. A sharp pain stabbed behind my eyes from fighting his order. I looked from his tense face to the sealed door. Maya was alone and scared because of me. I had to get to her. The mate bond ached in my chest like a bruise. I could not fight him and it at the same time. I gritted my teeth until my jaw hurt. A single hot tear traced a line down my cheek. My right foot twitched. I forced it to lift an inch off the floor. The way he had looked at me just then was not the bond. I did not know what to do with that. He saw my foot move. His expression just changed. The forced light left his eyes. He just looked tired. He said my name, not as a command this time. It sounded like a plea. He took one step toward me. He reached out a hand. His fingers were streaked with those old, silvery scars. I saw my chance. I didn't go forward. I threw my weight sideways instead. My shoulder hit a small side table. A ceramic vase went crashing to the floor right between us. The sound was so loud in that quiet house. Kalen flinched back from the shards. That 1 second of distraction was all I needed. The shock of it broke my focus on his command. My body was my own again. I turned and I ran back down the hallway, away from the sealed front door. I headed for the kitchen, and for the old delivery entrance he'd never mentioned, but I'd found anyway. Everything else I could deal with. Why he'd never mentioned it was different. The ghost of his final, furious shout was still vibrating in my clenched jaw as I ran. Corbin Rook's receiving hall swallowed me whole. The air was cold and opulent, thick with the smell of chilled marble and this slow-burning incense. Corbin himself stood waiting in the center of the room. His men were shoving Maya toward a black van idling in the open doorway. Her silver locket flashed once in the harsh light. "The deal was my freedom for hers," I yelled, straining against the 2 guards holding my arms. Corbin smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "The deal was for you to come," he said, his voice smooth. "I never said I would let her go." He gave a nod. The van doors slammed shut. Then he walked over to a heavy metal door set into the wall. He yanked it open. The smell hit me first. Fear, unwashed bodies. Rust. Cages lined the walls inside the warehouse space. Captured wolves stared out from behind the bars. Their eyes were empty. "This is the real deal," Corbin said. He gestured inside like some proud tour guide. "My collection, you're kind when they are useful." He turned back to me. He grabbed my chin, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. I heard Maya's muffled sob from inside the van. "Submit to me willingly," he said. His voice was low and even. "Or watch your friend join them. Permanently." I stopped struggling. My body just went limp in his grip. I was so tired. The fight drained out of me all at once. I looked at the cages. I looked at the van where Maya was. Corbin's smile widened. He saw my defeat. I thought about what my hand would do when it finally reached for Kalen S. It wouldn't be soft. It would be a grip, a claim, a pull into the fight, but my hand was empty now. My shoulders slumped. I nodded once. It was a small movement. It felt like giving up everything. I pushed the thought aside, whether my empty hand had really been my choice. That would come back. The cold pressure of Corbin's ringed hand still lingered on my shoulder like a brand. From my hidden perch among the jagged rocks, I watched a guard patrol the courtyard below. His boots crunched on the gravel in a steady, boring rhythm. My hiding place was just a shallow scrape in the cliffside. It smelled of dry moss and old bird droppings. I doubled back after my escape, drawn by the bond's quiet pull. It was a faint warmth behind my ribs now, not an ache. It led me here to a view of the compound's rear delivery yard, and I saw the answer to my earlier question about that old entrance. A heavy steel door was set into the stone foundation, almost invisible under a tangle of dead ivy. A single guard leaned against the wall beside it, bored, scratching his neck. He hadn't chosen me, the bond had. There was a difference. Yet I was still here, watching for a way back in, because I'd left a part of myself in that courtyard with Maya. A shift in the air behind me made my breath catch. I knew his scent before I turned. Kalen Thorne moved with a predator's silence. He settled beside me on the narrow ledge. His large frame made the space feel instantly smaller. He didn't look at me at first. His eyes were fixed on the compound below. The silver blue of them was dull with exhaustion. A fresh cut bisected his left eyebrow. He held himself perfectly still, but I saw it. The slight tremor in the hand he braced against the rock. He was hurt. And he was tired. He had every reason to rage at me for running. "The pup is safe," he said. His voice was a rough scrape of sound. "With a loyalist 2 valleys over." I just nodded. I waited for the command, for the anger. It didn't come. He let out a long, controlled breath. "Storming the front gate would get us both killed," he stated. It wasn't a plan. It was a fact he had accepted. "So we do nothing?" I asked. The words came out harder than I meant. He finally turned his head. His gaze wasn't on the compound anymore. It was on me. "You came back. Why?" I looked away at the board guard by the hidden door. Maya is still in there. "That's not all." He was quiet for too long. When I glanced back, he was studying his own trembling hand. He made a fist, but the shaking didn't stop. He seemed surprised by it. "I would have barred that delivery entrance too," he said, almost to himself. "Years ago, when I built this place, I didn't. I left it as a weakness." He opened his hand, stared at the faint, silvery scars across his palm. "A king should not have weaknesses." The admission just hung between us. It wasn't an apology, it was something truer. It was the crack in the armor. I didn't know what to say. The bond hummed, a soft pull drawing my attention to the line of his shoulder, the cut on his brow. I wanted to reach out. I didn't. The space between us was charged with everything unsaid. He hadn't tried to take my choice away this time. He had followed me. The weight of that almost moment pressed down on the dry moss and the silent rocks. Whatever came next, why his hand wouldn't stop shaking when he made a fist, that was the part I hadn't figured out. The tremor in my hands had settled into a deep, cold ache by the time I reached the cache. My numb fingers fumbled with the frozen combination lock buried in the mossy roots of the old oak. The hidden door opened with a groan of old hinges. The air inside smelled of wet earth and rust. I ran my fingers over the dusty shelf where the ledger should have been. My stomach dropped. There was nothing there but grit. Then I saw Maya's phone on the dirt floor. It shouldn't have been there. My human friend's phone should have been with her. I picked it up. My hands were shaking. The screen was cracked, but the battery still held a charge. I pressed the button. The screen lit up. A photo filled the display. It showed Maya in a concrete cell I recognized from Corbin's compound. Her face was pale. Her eyes were wide with fear. A text message appeared below the image. It was from Corbin's number. It read, "Looking for this." My breath hitched. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. It landed screen up on the dark earth. Maya's terrified face stayed bright. Corbin wasn't just a criminal alpha trying to steal territory. He was taunting me. He'd taken my only friend as bait. I clutched my chest with one hand. The mate bond to Kalen gave a sharp ache right beneath my ribs. It was a reminder of the other power I was tied to. I couldn't save Maya alone. That choice was gone. My empty hand had never been a choice at all. It was an illusion. I bent down, picked up the phone, and slid it into my pocket. Then I turned and started running back toward the safe house I'd just escaped. I had to find Kalen. The grit of forest soil was still packed tight beneath my fingernails. My new reality came into focus against a concrete wall, scarred and smelling faintly of old blood. A heavy door scraped open. Corbin Rook stepped inside. His smile showed too many teeth. 2 of his guards followed, dragging Maya between them. They dropped her on the floor. My friend landed with a sickening thud. A patch of her hair was matted with something dark. Her eyes were swollen shut. I cried out and lunged for her. The guards caught my arms and wrenched me back. The force sent a sharp pain through my shoulders. I fought, but their hands were like iron. Corbin watched me struggle, his head tilted like he was studying an insect. He walked over and crouched in front of me. He didn't touch my chin. Instead, he pressed his thumb hard into the center of my forehead. The pressure was intense, demeaning. "Accept the bond with me," he said. His voice was quiet, reasonable. "Say the words, or I will let my men finish their work on her. They were just getting started." I looked past him at Maya. She tried to lift her head but couldn't. A low moan escaped her cracked lips. My defiance shattered. It felt like my bones turned to dust inside me. I nodded. A hot tear traced a line through the dirt on my cheek. Corbin's smile became genuine, a true expression of pleasure. He released the pressure on my forehead and stood. The guards let go of my arms. I crawled to Maya on the rough concrete. I gathered her head into my lap. Her breathing was shallow and wet. He wasn't human. I had to keep reminding myself of that. Across the distance, through the cold walls, I felt a sudden, desperate pull in my chest. It wasn't my own fear. It was a silent, frantic question. And without thinking, I reached for it, pouring every ounce of my terror for Maya into that invisible thread. The raw ache of my silent screams still clawed at the inside of my throat. My knees sank into the cold, damp grit of the cave floor. The scent of wet stone and old pine filled the air. Kalen Thorne barred the cave entrance with a heavy fallen branch. His broad shoulders were a dark shape against the night outside. The baby in his arms gave a thin, hungry sound. I slid down the rough cave wall and hugged my knees to my chest. My whole body felt heavy, used up. He crossed the small space and placed the infant carefully in my lap. The baby was so light. "She's hungry," Kalen said. His voice was rough from shouting, or from the fight. My hands shook as I fumbled with the bag for a bottle of formula. The cold air made my fingers clumsy. I could feel Kalen watching me, but I kept my eyes on the task. I focused on measuring the powder into the water. It was something my hands could do. The baby fed quietly in the sudden stillness. The only sounds were her soft sucks and the distant drip of water somewhere in the cave. Kalen stood by the entrance, his head tilted as he listened. The line of his jaw was tight even in the shadows. I traced a faint bruise on the baby's tiny arm with my thumb. My tears fell then, warm and silent on the back of my hand. I didn't make a sound. He turned from the entrance and saw. He looked at my wet face for a long moment. Then Kalen moved. He crouched in front of me, the movement slow and deliberate. His hand, marked with those silvery scars, came up and covered mine where it rested on the baby. His palm was warm and calloused. The contact sent a quiet warmth up my arm. He held it there for one breath, too. It was a comfort I had not asked for. Then he pulled his hand back fast. He looked away first, down at the cave floor. "My phone was in the SUV," he said, his voice low. "The one you tried to leave in, I called it from mine before I smashed it." He did not look at me. I held the baby closer and watched the man who had lost everything. I didn't know what to say, why he'd pulled his hand away like that. I'd been wrong to ignore it this long. The warmth of Kalen's cloak was the only comfort against the deep chill in my bones. I blinked against the sudden, sterile white light of the holding cell. The air smelled like antiseptic and ozone. Across the central chamber, the sounds of the fight were a brutal symphony of snarls and impacts. A guard, a large man with a shaved head, stood outside my barred door. He watched the chaos with his back to me. This was my only chance. My fingers found the thin metal hairpin I had hidden in my sleeve. I pushed it into the lock and twisted with all my strength. His world had rules I didn't understand, and I couldn't survive them. The lock gave way with a sharp, satisfying click. I slipped out and into the small control room beside the cell block. My target was the master release panel on the wall. It was a mess of switches and blinking lights. I scanned the labels, my heart pounding in my ears. A large red alarm button sat right next to the primary release lever. One wrong move would bring every guard running back here. I could taste the metallic fear on my tongue. I took a deep breath to steady my hands and closed my eyes for 1 second. Then I reached out and pulled the heavy lever down. A row of green lights flashed on the panel. Down the hall, a series of cell doors hissed open in unison. A wave of confused murmurs and shuffling feet followed, but heavy footsteps now pounded toward the control room from the main chamber. They had heard the noise. I ducked down behind the solid metal console, my knees pressing into the cold concrete floor. I held my breath. The footsteps skidded to a stop just outside the doorway. I saw the shadow of the guard with the shaved head fall across the threshold. He was looking right at the open panel and the thrown lever. He had seen what I had done. I put it away and got on with things. Whether he'd seen my hand on the lever, that refused to stay put. My knuckles still ached from holding the baton's wires together. The sanctum's heavy door swung shut behind me, sealing out the riot's roar. The air here hummed with sterile climate control. I saw Kalen first. His tall frame was pressed against the glass wall that looked into Corbin's office. He watched the rival Alpha inside. Corbin Rook stood at a wide metal desk, shoving papers into a leather bag. The shipping ledger sat right there next to his hand. Chaos outside the sanctum door grew louder. Freed Omegas ran past the thick glass, their shadows moving fast. A guard shouted and then went silent. Corbin looked up from his packing, his head tilted toward the noise. This was our only chance. Kalen moved like liquid shadow. He inched the office door open and slid inside, his body kept low to the ground. He grabbed the ledger from the desk. Corbin turned at the sound. His scent, a mix of expensive cologne and raw aggression, filled the small room. I saw Kalen flinch. His shoulders tightened as if holding up a great weight. He clutched the book to his chest, his teeth showing in a hard line. He was fighting the old Alpha command to submit. I felt a sudden, warm pull toward him in my chest, a stupid flicker of pride. Corbin's cold eyes found Kalen's. Rage twisted his scarred face. "You think this book matters now?" Corbin said. His voice was calm, and that was worse. He stepped toward a console on the wall. Kalen backed toward the door I held open, the ledger secured under his arm. He stood straight and refused to lower his gaze. Corbin input a rapid series of codes from an open page of the ledger. A map lit up on a large screen. "I'll burn every territory on this list before I let you have them," Corbin said. He threw the ledger onto the floor at Kalen's feet. Then he turned and vanished through a hidden panel in the wall. The screen kept glowing with pulsing red dots. But why I'd felt that pull in my chest when he fought the command? I still had no answer for that. My hands still buzzed with the phantom weight of the ledger. In the sudden quiet of the main hall, my boots crunched over shattered glass and spent brass. I pulled Kalen into the only shelter I saw, a supply closet with a broken door. His weight sagged against me. I lowered us both to the floor, my back against cool cinder block. The infant pup in my other arm made a soft gurgle against my neck. Distant shouts and the thud of running feet filtered through the thin wall. Kalen slumped beside me, his eyes half closed and his face the color of old paper. A dark stain spread beneath his hand where he clutched his side. I shifted the baby to my lap and tore a strip from the hem of my shirt. My fingers were clumsy. I pressed the fabric hard against the wound on Kalen's side. He drew a sharp breath through his teeth but didn't speak. His hand came up to cover mine, his palm rough and warm. His grip had no strength in it. That scared me more than the blood. The way he'd looked at me just then. It wasn't about the threat. I didn't know what to do with that. I had to check the baby next. My hands were shaking as I unwrapped the blanket just enough. He was warm. He was breathing fine, his little chest going up and down in a steady rhythm. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. A tear fell right onto the blanket. I kissed his forehead and wiped my cheek on my shoulder. I held him close again. That tiny weight felt like a promise I had to keep. Kalen watched us. His silver blue eyes tracked my every move. He was quiet for a long time, just watching me hold his child. Then his head tipped back against the wall. "I can't stand up," he said. His voice was low. It was stripped bare. It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a statement of fact. It was a raw request, an admission that he had nothing left to give. Shouts echoed closer down the hall. Something heavy crashed. We couldn't stay hidden long. I held my mate and the baby tighter. I put my arm around Kalen's shoulders to keep him upright. The bond between us was a quiet pull in my chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with his title. I'd stayed for Maya, for the child, for a debt I felt I owed. But in that cramped closet, with his head heavy against mine, I knew it was simpler than that. What'd I do when the guards reached our hiding spot? That wasn't going away. The warmth of Kalen's blood still coated my palm, sticky and cooling in the filtered air. I stepped into the corridor's harsh light. My boots slipped on a patch of damp, green-tinged grime spreading from a vent. Maya huddled inside a broken supply closet just ahead. She pressed her shaking hands against her eyes for a second, then forced them down to the glowing tablet on her knees. The stolen ledger schematics were her only focus now. Her whole body was rigid with a desperate kind of focus. A guard screamed somewhere down the hall. It was a raw sound of confusion and rage. Maya flinched so hard her elbow knocked against a shelf of cleaning bottles. One tipped over with a hollow plastic clatter. She ignored it. She fumbled with the tablet. Her fingers left sweaty smears on the screen as she zoomed in on a ventilation diagram. I could hear her whispering fast numbers to herself, trying to trace a path to the main intake. She stopped whispering, her head tilted. She dragged her thumb across a corner of the schematic. There was a small, handwritten note there. She looked at it with a confused kind of wonder, her fear forgotten for a single breath. She turned the screen toward me. I could see Corbin's tight, angry script. It said, "Maintenance access, my mistake. A consequence of his own arrogance. left for us to find. The door handle of the closet rattled hard. Maya held her breath and slid deeper into the shadows. She clutched the tablet tight to her chest. Her wide eyes met mine across the few feet of hallway. This was her choice, her plan. I gave one short nod. She moved toward a low vent cover, her tool in hand. She was trusting the mistake of the man who wanted to own us all. Whatever came next, whether Corbin's mistake was a genuine accident or a trap, that was the part I hadn't figured out. The sharp, chemical sting of the gas still clawed at the back of my throat as I followed Maya down the last corridor. Corbin's control room door was cold against my palm. Its steel surface hummed with a deep vibration from the machinery behind it. We shoved it open. Inside, Kaylin and Corbin were a blur on the metal catwalk above the console banks. Emergency lights flashed, turning their fight into a series of frozen pictures. Corbin, the rival alpha with the jagged scar, slammed a red button on the railing. A new siren wailed, different from the others. Kaylin tackled him. They crashed against the railing with a sound like tearing metal. His claws were out, but his movements were wrong. He stared at Corbin's face with a confused panic I knew. The gas was in his head, showing him things that weren't there. A flicker of warmth, useless and desperate, pulled at my chest. He hadn't chosen me. Something else had put us here. There was a difference. Corbin laughed, a wet and broken sound. He jammed a shock prod into Kaylin's side. Kaylin roared, his whole back arched. "Your alpha can't save you now," Corbin screamed. Kaylin shook his head like a dog shaking off water. He grabbed the prod with a bare hand, his fingers locked around it. The smell of burning fur filled the room. I saw the tendons in his forearms stand out like cables. He snapped the weapon in two. The pieces clattered down into the machinery below. He looked at Corbin then. The confusion was gone. His eyes were clear and very cold. He wrapped his hands around Corbin's throat and pushed him back over the railing. Corbin's boots scraped for purchase on the slick metal grating. His hands clawed at Kaylin's wrists. I saw Corbin's mouth move, forming words I couldn't hear over the sirens. Kaylin's face did not change. He leaned his weight forward. Corbin's frantic kicks hit only air. I put it away. I got on with things, but the words Corbin had tried to form with his last breath, they refused to stay put. The raw, stinging ache in my knuckles hadn't yet faded into a proper throb. I stepped over the shattered remains of the main gate into the courtyard. The only sound was the dry scrape of loose gravel shifting under my boots. I found a low, broken wall and sat. The sleeping infant was a warm, solid weight against my chest. Across the wreckage, Kaylin Thorne stood alone. His broad shoulders were slumped under a layer of concrete dust and drying blood. He turned his head and looked at me. His silver-blue eyes were flat, distant. "I had to," he said. His voice was rough, quiet. It cracked on the last word. He was going to kill everyone. He finally held my gaze, and I saw it, the truth of it. A single, clean track cut through the grime on his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. This was the man who had just killed for us. And the cost sat in his stillness. I adjusted the baby in my arms. My own exhaustion felt heavy, like a weight in my bones. Without thinking, I lifted my free hand toward him. My fingers stopped an inch from the torn fabric of his sleeve, the space between my skin and his. It felt warm, like sunlight on stone. It was a quiet pull, not a command. Kaylin's hand moved. It trembled, just a little. It came up to meet mine. He stopped before our fingers touched. He just looked at my open palm, then back at my face. His expression, it was a question. He was asking if he was still allowed. The words Corbin had tried to form with his last breath. They were just ash now. They meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was right here, in this broken yard, between his hesitation and my waiting hand. And here's where it gets crazy. Why his hand trembled before it touched mine? I'd been wrong. I'd been wrong to ignore it this long. Real quick, if you're here for the payoff, for that final moment when everything clicks, hit subscribe. Because this is where the real story begins. I let my hand stay where it was, open, waiting. The sirens had finally stopped. The only sound was our breathing. His ragged, mine shallow, the baby slept on, peaceful against the chaos. Kaylin let out a breath. It sounded like it had been trapped inside him for years. Then his fingers brushed against mine. It wasn't electricity. It wasn't a spark. It was solid, real, a point of warmth in all that cold wreckage. His calloused skin against my palm. His hand closed around mine, not hard, just enough to hold on. He didn't pull me closer. He didn't say anything. He just held on. And in that grip, I felt it. The tremor. The fine, constant shake running through him. It wasn't fear, it was everything he'd been holding back. The fight, the fury, the choice he'd just made at the railing. I thought his stillness was the cost. I was wrong. The cost was this: letting someone see the tremor, letting someone feel it. I tightened my fingers around his. I know, I said. My voice was just as quiet as his had been. I know you had too. He bowed his head. His forehead almost touched the back of my hand. When he looked up again, his eyes weren't so distant. The flatness was gone. There was just a deep, weary relief. We stood there like that for I don't know how long, two people and a baby surrounded by what was left. The old laws were broken, the old alpha was gone, and we were still here, still holding on. So let me ask you, when the fight is finally over and the dust settles, what's left? Is it the wreckage? Or is it the hand you reach for in the middle of it? If you want to find out what happens after the silence, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.